Anyone can fake a war story with an old photo. Cadet Ryan Miller said it loud enough for the back row to hear, holding the faded mission photograph between two fingers as if it were evidence in a trial he had already decided. The training classroom at Westbridge Naval Academy went still. 40 cadets in pressed uniforms turned toward him, some confused, some curious, some waiting for the kind of confrontation that spreads through a military campus before lunch. At the front of the room, Commander Grace Whitaker stood beside the instructor's table with her hands relaxed at her sides. She did not reach for the photograph. She did not raise her voice. She only looked at it. The picture was old, its corners worn soft from years inside a sealed folder, its surface dulled by dust, fingerprints, and time. Four service members stood in a damaged hallway under emergency lighting, their uniforms marked by a long day no camera could fully explain. One woman stood beside Grace, partly hidden by shadow, her posture straight despite visible exhaustion, one hand resting near Grace's shoulder as if the two of them had been holding each other upright before the picture was taken. Ryan did not know that woman. Not yet. To him, the photograph was just another prop, another piece of battlefield mythology carried into a classroom by a visiting officer who looked too composed to have lived the stories older instructors whispered about. Grace Whitaker was not what the cadets expected when the Academy announced a special lecture on mission discipline and field judgment. She was white, in her late 30s, with blonde-brown hair pinned low, clear gray-blue eyes, and a face beautiful in the severe way of someone shaped more by restraint than vanity. Her Navy uniform was immaculate, but plain. No loud display, no dramatic entrance, no attempt to dominate the room. Only a small silver badge on her sleeve drew attention if someone looked long enough, an eagle curved around a naval star, wings folded as if guarding something sacred. Ryan had noticed it earlier and dismissed it as another symbol meant to make silence look important. He had spent his whole life around real stories, real medals, real sacrifice. His mother, Major Evelyn Miller, was the standard by which he measured military honor. Her commendations hung in the hallway of their home in Maryland. Her official portrait stood on the mantel. Her voice had taught him that respect was earned through service, not suggested by mystery. So when Grace stepped into the classroom and spoke softly about listening before leading, Ryan heard performance. When she told them that the smallest decision in a hallway could matter more than the loudest order in a briefing room, he heard exaggeration. And when he saw the old photograph tucked inside her folder during the break, he thought he had found the truth behind the myth. Now the folder lay open on the desk, one photo missing, and every cadet knew who had taken it. Grace finally lifted her eyes from the image to Ryan's face. There was no embarrassment in her expression, no fear, only recognition moving slowly beneath the surface, as if the past had entered the room wearing a cadet's uniform. "Cadet Miller," she said quietly, "do you know what you are holding?" Ryan's chin lifted. Maybe the class deserves to know that first, ma'am. A few cadets shifted in their seats. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Outside the windows, the academy courtyard sat bright and ordinary under a clean American morning. Inside, the air had changed. Grace took one step toward him, calm enough to make the distance feel longer than it was. "Before you make that photograph smaller," she said, "you should understand that someone in it may be larger than every story you grew up believing." Grace Whitaker let the question hang in the classroom without chasing it. That was the first thing the cadets noticed. Most officers would have taken the photograph back. Some would have written Ryan up on the spot. Others would have filled the silence with rank, rules, and sharp correction. Grace did none of that. She stood in the clean white light of the academy classroom, her uniform pressed, her shoulders square, her voice still quiet enough that every cadet had to listen harder. That was her way. She never demanded a room. She made the room choose whether it was mature enough to hear her. Westbridge Naval Academy had invited her for a morning seminar on field judgment, but Grace had arrived without the usual display that followed decorated guests. No aid, no dramatic biography, no long introduction listing operations nobody could verify. She carried one leather folder, one capped pen, and the old photograph Ryan now held like stolen proof. To the cadets, she looked almost too simple for the stories attached to her name. She was a white woman in her late 30s, beautiful in a controlled, unsmiling way, with blonde-brown hair secured low at the back of her neck and gray-blue eyes that moved across details without seeming to search for them. Her face had the kind of calm that made younger people mistake discipline for distance. The silver eagle and naval star badge on her sleeve caught the classroom lights whenever she shifted, but she never explained it. During the first hour, she had spoken about restraint more than courage. She told them that panic was often loud, but good judgment was usually quiet. She asked them to map exits before reading mission objectives, to notice who was tired before assigning responsibility, to count the seconds between a question and an answer because hesitation could reveal more than words. Some cadets leaned in. Others took careful notes. Ryan Miller watched with his arms folded, hearing every sentence through the shadow of his mother. Major Evelyn Miller had raised him on exactness. Shoes aligned under the bed. Uniform shirts hung by color. Birthday cards signed, even during deployments. She had never made service sound glamorous. She made it sound necessary. But the walls of their home told another story. Commendations framed in dark wood, a formal portrait in dress uniform, a folded flag from a unit ceremony, photographs of his mother shaking hands with commanders whose names appeared in textbooks. Ryan loved those images because they gave shape to the years she had missed dinners, holidays, and school events. They made absence feel like duty. Because of that, he disliked anyone who wore mystery like decoration. When Grace spoke about silence, he heard performance. When she mentioned unnamed teams and hard choices, he heard someone borrowing weight from places no one in the room could check. Then he saw the photograph inside her folder during the break, half hidden beneath attendance sheets and lecture notes. Its old paper, damaged edge, and red emergency light looked almost too perfect. He told himself he was protecting the class from being impressed by a story that might not be earned. Now, standing with the picture in his hand and every eye on him, Ryan felt the first small shift of uncertainty. Grace was not looking at him like a thief. She was looking at him like someone who had just picked up a memory too heavy for his hands. Ryan Miller did not lower the photograph, but his grip changed. The confident pinch between two fingers became a firmer hold, his thumb pressing against the worn corner as if the paper might suddenly accuse him. Around him, the other cadets sat straighter. No one whispered now. The classroom at Westbridge Naval Academy, so ordinary a few minutes earlier with its polished floor, white walls, and neat rows of desks, had become too quiet for anyone to hide inside the crowd. Grace Whitaker walked toward the center aisle with the slow control of someone who had learned that speed was not always strength. Her eyes stayed on the photograph, not on the insult. That unsettled Ryan more than anger would have. Anger would have given him something to push against. Grace gave him only consequence. "You removed that from my folder," she said. It was not a question. Ryan lifted his chin again, trying to recover the certainty that had carried him out of his seat. "I wanted to know why a guest instructor would bring a private mission photo into a classroom and not explain it." Grace stopped 10 feet away from him. "You could have asked. Would you have answered?" "Maybe not." A few cadets looked at one another. Ryan seized on it. "Then how are we supposed to learn from stories nobody will tell us?" Grace's expression did not change, but something in her eyes grew heavier. "By learning that not every silence is an invitation to break it." The words settled hard across the room. Ryan felt heat rise in his face, not from shame yet, but from the pressure of being seen too clearly. He had expected Grace to defend herself. He had expected rank, correction, maybe a threat of disciplinary action. Instead, she had turned the room toward the thing he had not considered, that taking the photograph had not revealed truth, it had violated trust. Still, pride kept him standing. "With respect, ma'am, this academy teaches accountability. If that photo matters, why hide it?" Grace glanced at the image again. For figures in a damaged corridor. Red emergency light. Dust on shoulders. One woman standing close beside her, face partly shadowed. A memory folded into paper because there were people in it who deserved more than display. Because some people in that photograph came home to families who only knew pieces of what they survived, Grace said. Ryan's mouth tightened. The phrase touched something he did not want touched. Families who only knew pieces. That was his childhood in one sentence. His mother had always answered carefully when he asked about deployments. She gave him places without details, dates without stories, lessons without scenes. When he was younger, he thought she was protecting him. As he got older, he began to believe she was protecting herself. So he had built her story from what the house offered. framed awards, formal photographs, polite speeches at ceremonies, commanders calling her brave. He knew the public version of Major Evelyn Miller so well that he mistook it for the whole woman. "My mother never hid from what she did," Ryan said. But his voice came out less steady than he wanted. Grace looked at him then, truly looked at him, and the room seemed to narrow around his last name before she had even spoken it. "Your mother?" she asked. Ryan blinked. "Yes, ma'am." "And who is your mother, Cadet Miller?" He answered automatically, with the pride he had carried for years. "Major Evelyn Miller." The effect was immediate and quiet. Grace's face did not break, but the stillness around her changed. It was the stillness of a locked door opening from the other side. Her eyes moved from Ryan to the photograph in his hand, then back to his face, searching now not for guilt, but for resemblance. The jawline, the brow, the same stubborn lift of the chin. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "Evelyn has a son named Ryan." The classroom held its breath. Ryan stared at her. For the first time since he had stood up, he forgot to look certain. "How do you know that?" he asked. Grace did not answer right away. She took one more step closer, close enough now that Ryan could see the silver eagle and naval star badge on her sleeve catch the light. "Because she said your name in that hallway," Grace said. More than once. Ryan Miller felt the room tilt without anything moving. Grace Whitaker had spoken his name the way his mother did when she was tired and trying not to show it. Not casually, not as a detail pulled from a file, as a sound remembered from a place where memory did not fade cleanly. He looked down at the photograph again, and for the first time, he stopped looking for evidence against Grace and started looking for the woman beside her. The image was still unclear. Emergency light washed part of the hallway in red. Dust blurred the edges of uniforms. One corner of the photo had been creased so many times that a pale line ran across the lower half. But the woman next to Grace was there, half turned toward the camera, one shoulder close to Grace's, her face partly shadowed, her posture straight with that unmistakable Miller stubbornness Ryan had inherited without ever asking for it. He had seen his mother in hundreds of formal pictures. Dress uniform, award stage, flag ceremony, promotion board, perfect posture, polished shoes, controlled smile. He had never seen her like this. Younger, worn down, human. "That is not possible," Ryan said, but the sentence had no strength behind it. Grace did not take the photo from him. She let him keep holding it, because some truths had to be felt before they were returned. "Look at her left eyebrow," Grace said quietly. Ryan stared. There, almost hidden by shadow, was the small pale mark he had known his entire life. His mother had always brushed off questions about it. "A rough day overseas," she would say. "Nothing worth making dramatic." In the photograph, that scar looked fresh enough to belong to a story she had never given him. Ryan's throat tightened. A cadet in the second row shifted, then stopped, sensing that the room had crossed from confrontation into something private. Grace turned slightly, so the class could see only her profile, giving Ryan as much dignity as the moment allowed. "Your mother stood beside me during a mission that never made a recruiting poster," she said. There were no speeches afterward. No cameras waiting outside. Just a hallway, a failing power grid, and people counting on each other to stay steady. Ryan looked up. Why did she never tell me? Grace's expression softened, not with pity, but with respect for a question that had taken years to form. Because some service members come home with stories they do not want their children to carry too early. The words reached him harder than any reprimand could have. He thought of his mother at the kitchen table, folding laundry with one hand while reviewing reports with the other. He thought of the nights she paused in the hallway outside his bedroom before entering, as if choosing which version of herself he was old enough to meet. He had mistaken her silence for distance. Maybe it had been protection. "She said my name?" he asked. Grace nodded once. "She said she had a son who loved model airplanes and hated peas." A quiet breath moved through the classroom, almost a laugh, almost not. Ryan's eyes dropped. He had not hated peas since he was 6 years old. His mother had remembered that about him in a place he had never imagined her standing. Grace continued, her voice low and even. "She kept talking about you because it gave the others something ordinary to hold on to. A baseball glove in the garage. A school picture on the refrigerator. A child waiting at home. That is what kept the room human." Ryan's hand trembled slightly around the photograph. The arrogance that had carried him to his feet now felt childish, too small for what he was holding. He had wanted to expose Grace. Instead, he had opened a door into his mother's courage and found Grace standing there, not as a fraud, not as a visitor borrowing glory, but as someone who had been present when the official portraits were still years away. Grace finally extended one hand, palm up, not demanding, simply offering him the choice to return what he had taken. Ryan looked at the photograph one more time. His mother's shadowed face. Grace beside her. The red light. The silent proof. Then he placed the photo into Grace's hand with both of his. Grace Whitaker received the photograph with the same care another officer might give a folded flag. She did not slide it back into the folder right away. She held it at chest level and looked at it long enough for the room to understand that the image had never been decoration. It had weight. It had names. It had a before and an after. Ryan Miller remained standing in the aisle, his shoulders no longer squared for challenge, his hands empty now and unsure of what to do with themselves. The cadets watched him, but no one looked entertained anymore. The classroom had become a place of consequence, not spectacle. Grace turned the photograph slightly toward the window, letting the clean Maryland sunlight fall across the faded paper. "Your mother hated being photographed," she said. Ryan looked up, surprised by the ordinary detail. Grace's mouth almost softened into a smile, but not quite. She said cameras made people stand like they were pretending to be better than they were. A quiet ripple moved through the class, not laughter, exactly, but recognition. Ryan knew that sounded like his mother. Evelyn Miller had never liked formal portraits. She stood for them because the military required records, families wanted memories, and ceremonies needed images. But at home, she preferred the unposed pictures. Muddy boots by the back door, Ryan asleep on a couch with a book open on his chest, a half-burned pancake from a Saturday morning she had tried to reclaim after returning from deployment. Grace looked at the cadets now, and her voice carried without getting louder. "The photograph you just saw was taken after the lights came back on. That is all I can say about the mission itself. But I can tell you what mattered in that hallway." Ryan stood very still. Grace tapped the image lightly, not on the faces, but near the red glow behind them. Nobody there felt like a legend. Nobody was thinking about medals. They were thinking about the next 10 feet, the next open door, the next voice that needed to stay calm. She paused, and the academy classroom seemed to fade around the edges. Major Evelyn Miller was that voice. Ryan swallowed. The words did not make his mother smaller. They made her real. Grace continued, careful not to turn memory into performance. She noticed who was breathing too fast. She knew who needed a task and who needed silence. She kept her hands steady when everyone else needed something steady to look at. That is leadership, not the speech afterward, not the framed certificate. The moment when no one is watching and people borrow their courage from yours. A cadet in the front row lowered his pen. Another stopped recording notes on his tablet. Ryan felt each sentence take apart the version of honor he had been defending. He had thought respect meant guarding his mother's image from anyone unworthy of standing near it. But Grace had not taken from that image. She had been part of the reason it existed. "I thought you were using her," Ryan said, barely above a whisper. Grace looked at him directly. "No, I was remembering her." That answered more than his accusation. It answered the silence in the room, the badge on her sleeve, the folder she carried alone. Ryan nodded once, but shame held him where he stood. "I should not have taken it." "No," Grace said. "You should not have." She let the correction sit, clean and unsoftened. Then she placed the photograph back into the folder, aligning it carefully beneath a blank sheet so the class could not stare at it anymore. But the worst mistake would be leaving this room thinking your mother's courage belongs only to you. Ryan blinked. Grace stepped back toward the front table. Every person who serves leaves pieces of themselves with other people. Teammates, families, strangers they protect and never meet. You do not honor them by locking their story behind pride. You honor them by becoming careful with what you do not understand. The words settled differently than a reprimand. They gave Ryan a way forward without erasing what he had done. He looked toward the place where the photograph had disappeared inside the folder, then back to Grace. For the first time that morning, he saw the silver eagle and naval star badge not as decoration, but as a quiet marker of a life that did not need to advertise itself. His voice steadied only when he stopped trying to sound strong. "Yes, ma'am," he said. And this time, everyone in the room believed he meant it. Grace Whitaker resumed the lesson, but the classroom no longer heard her the same way. Before, her words had sounded like theory to some of them, polished ideas from a visiting commander with a quiet voice and a classified past. Now each sentence carried the weight of the photograph hidden beneath the blank sheet in her folder. She did not mention the mission name. She did not describe details that were not hers to share. Instead, she turned back to the whiteboard and wrote 3 words in clean block letters: attention, restraint, responsibility. The marker squeaked once, sharp in the silence. Field judgment is not about being the loudest person in the room, she said. It is about being the person who notices what pride walks past. Ryan Miller lowered himself slowly into his seat. The chair felt different beneath him, as if sitting down required more humility than standing up had required courage. He kept his eyes on the front of the room, but part of him remained inside that faded photograph. The red emergency light, the damaged hallway, his mother's younger face half hidden in shadow, Grace beside her like proof that the official version of a life is never the whole version. The cadet beside Ryan, a quiet young man named Daniel Cross, glanced at him but said nothing. That silence was a mercy. Grace continued with the same calm rhythm, guiding them through a scenario about a failed communications relay and a team forced to navigate by memory, timing, and trust. She asked them what they would do first. Several cadets answered with textbook responses: secure the area, establish command, verify personnel, restore contact. Grace listened to each one, then asked what they would notice before giving an order. That question slowed the room down. A cadet near the window said she would look for who was injured. Another said he would check who was still calm enough to carry instructions. Ryan raised his hand last. Grace looked at him without surprise. Cadet Miller. His voice was quieter than before, but clearer. I would look for the person everyone else is already listening to, even if they do not outrank anyone. Grace held his gaze for a brief moment. Why? Ryan swallowed. Because rank tells you authority. Stress tells you trust. Something in Grace's expression shifted, barely visible, but enough. Good, she said. One word. No praise beyond what was earned. Ryan felt it more deeply than applause. The lesson moved on. The academy clock reached noon. Sunlight shifted across the floor. Pins moved again, not with the restless scratching of obligation, but with focus. No one tried to turn the moment into gossip while Grace was still in the room. She had taken a public challenge and folded it into a lesson without humiliating the cadet who deserved correction. That, too, became part of what they learned. Near the end, Grace closed her folder and rested her palm over it for half a second. Ryan saw the gesture. He understood now that the folder was not a prop. It was a place where the living kept faith with the parts of the past that could not stand in front of a class. You will all be trusted with things one day, Grace said. Information, people, memories, reputation. Do not confuse access with permission. Do not confuse curiosity with courage. And do not mistake someone's silence for emptiness. The final bell sounded outside in the corridor, followed by the muffled movement of cadets changing classes across the building. No one in Grace's room stood right away. Ryan remained seated, staring at his hands. They looked ordinary, but a few minutes earlier they had held a piece of his mother's life without earning it. When the cadets finally rose, chairs moved softly, almost respectfully. Ryan waited until the others began filing out. Then he walked to the front of the room and stopped at attention. Commander Whitaker, he said, permission to speak after class. Grace looked at him, the silver eagle and naval star on her sleeve catching the noon light. Granted. Ryan drew a careful breath. For the first time all morning, he was not preparing to defend himself. He was preparing to listen. The classroom emptied slowly, leaving behind the faint scrape of chair legs, the smell of dry erase marker, and the kind of silence that follows when a room has learned something it did not expect to learn. Ryan Miller stood at attention near the front desk, his eyes fixed just above Grace Whitaker's shoulder because looking directly at her still felt difficult. Grace closed the classroom door after the last cadet stepped into the hallway. She did not hurry him. She returned to the instructor's table, placed the leather folder flat in front of her, and waited with the same calm that had unsettled him earlier. Only now, Ryan understood that her calm was not distance. It was control earned through years of carrying things carefully. Ma'am, he said, I want to apologize for taking the photograph. Grace looked at him. That is the correct beginning. The words were firm, but not cruel. Ryan nodded. accepting that beginning was not the same as being finished. I also want to apologize for what I assumed. About you. About the photo. About why you kept it. He paused, searching for words that did not sound rehearsed. I thought I was defending my mother's honor. Grace rested one hand lightly on the folder. You were defending an image of her. Ryan absorbed that. It hurt because it was exact. His mother's image had been easy to defend. The polished portrait, the framed commendations, the speeches at ceremonies, the version of Major Evelyn Miller that stood still behind glass. The real woman was harder. She got quiet at strange times. She forgot where she put her keys after long days. She never liked fireworks. She smiled when people called her fearless, but Ryan had seen her hands tighten once under the dinner table when a dropped pan made a sudden noise in the kitchen. He had collected those moments without knowing where to put them. I think I wanted her story to be simple, he said. Grace's expression softened by a small degree. Most families do. Ryan looked at the folder. Was she scared? Grace did not answer quickly. Outside the classroom, cadets moved through the corridor, their voices muted by the door. Inside, the question sat between them with more honesty than anything Ryan had said all morning. Yes, Grace said finally. And she did her job anyway. Ryan closed his eyes for half a second. Somehow, that answer made his mother stronger, not weaker. Grace continued. Fear is not the opposite of courage. Carelessness is. Your mother was never careless. Ryan gave a quiet breath, almost a laugh, but too heavy to become one. She would say that. She did. Grace opened the folder and slid out the photograph, keeping it on the table this time. She turned it so Ryan could see without touching. She asked me not to let anyone turn that day into a trophy. Ryan looked at the image again, no longer searching for proof. He saw his mother beside Grace, young and tired and steady. He saw the hand near Grace's shoulder. He saw the way they stood close enough to suggest trust without needing to explain it. Why did you bring it here? He asked. Grace looked down at the photograph. Because I was going to speak about responsibility, and I needed to remember who taught me the cost of it. Ryan's throat tightened. My mother taught you. Grace nodded. That day, yes. In more ways than she ever knew. For a long moment, Ryan said nothing. Then he stood straighter, not from pride this time, but from respect. May I tell her I saw it? Grace slid the photograph back into the folder with care. Yes, but ask before you ask for the story. Ryan understood. For once, he did not want to take. He wanted to be invited. Grace picked up her folder and stepped toward the door. Before leaving, she looked back at him. Cadet Miller, you have your mother's stubbornness. Ryan braced for the correction. Grace opened the door. Learn her patience, too. Ryan Miller left the classroom with the photograph no longer in his hands, but heavier in his mind than it had ever been on paper. The hallway at Westbridge Naval Academy was bright with noon light and busy with cadets moving between classes, but the noise reached him from a distance. He walked past the glass cases filled with academy honors, past framed photographs of graduating classes, past polished plaques engraved with names he had once studied like a map to becoming important. For the first time, those displays did not look smaller, but they looked incomplete. Every award had a room behind it. Every portrait had a hallway the camera never showed. Every name had someone at home who knew only part of the cost. Ryan stopped near a quiet alcove beside the courtyard windows and took out his phone. His thumb hovered over his mother's contact for several seconds. The screen showed a simple name, Mom. Not Major Miller. Not the woman in the formal portrait over the mantel. Just Mom. He pressed call before pride could talk him out of it. The line rang 4 times. On the 5th, Evelyn Miller answered with the calm warmth he had known all his life. Ryan? Everything all right. He looked through the window at the academy courtyard, where cadets crossed in clean lines under the American flag. Yes, ma'am, he said automatically. Then he stopped himself. I mean, yes. I just finished a seminar. A seminar must have been serious if you were calling in the middle of the day. Her voice carried a faint smile. Ryan swallowed. The instructor was Commander Grace Whitaker. Silence followed. It was brief, but Ryan heard it. Not confusion. Recognition. A door opening somewhere far away. Grace, his mother said softly. Not Commander Whitaker. Grace. Ryan closed his eyes. That one word confirmed everything again. You know her? Yes, Evelyn said. I know her. Ryan leaned one shoulder against the wall. His reflection in the window looked younger than it had that morning. She had a photograph. Evelyn did not answer right away. In the pause, Ryan heard the low background sounds of home. A cabinet closing, maybe a kettle on the stove, the ordinary world that had somehow held a woman from a red-lit hallway inside it for years. Did she show it to you? Evelyn asked. Ryan looked down. Not exactly. Another pause. This one was different. A mother hearing what her son did not want to say. Ryan. He took the correction before it came. I took it from her folder. I thought she was using it to impress us. I thought I was protecting your story. The words sounded worse aloud than they had inside his head. Evelyn exhaled slowly. And what did you learn? No anger. No rescue. Just the question. Ryan looked at the courtyard again. That I do not know your whole story. Evelyn's voice softened. No child does. She said you kept people calm. Grace remembers kindly. She said you said my name. The line grew quiet. When Evelyn answered, the strength in her voice had changed shape. I did. Ryan pressed his lips together, fighting emotion without turning it into performance. Why did you never tell me? Because when I came home, you were little. You wanted pancakes, model airplanes, and someone to check under the bed for monsters. You did not need my hallway. You needed your mother. Ryan stared at the floor. The academy around him felt suddenly less like a place built from rank and more like a place built from people trying to become worthy of trust. I am sorry, he said, for taking the photo, for thinking your silence meant there was nothing there, for judging her. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Apologized to Grace. Then learn from her. I did. I will. Another small silence passed, gentler now. Mom, Ryan said, the word feeling different after everything. Was she important to you? Evelyn answered without hesitation. She stood beside me when standing was difficult. That is important enough. Ryan nodded, though she could not see him. Across the courtyard, Commander Grace Whitaker walked alone beneath the flag, leather folder at her side, silver eagle and naval star badge catching the sunlight for one brief second before she moved into shadow. Ryan watched her with new eyes. Not as a mystery to challenge. Not as a story to expose. As a person his mother remembered by first name. I understand, he said quietly. And for the first time that day, he almost did. By late afternoon, the story had already moved through Westbridge Naval Academy, but not in the way Ryan Miller expected. No one repeated his words like a joke. No one turned the classroom into a spectacle. The cadets who had been there spoke quietly, if they spoke at all, because some lessons lose their meaning when handled carelessly. Ryan spent the rest of the day doing what Commander Grace Whitaker had told him without saying it directly. He listened. In tactics class, he listened before answering. In formation, he listened to the cadence instead of trying to be the loudest voice in the line. At dinner, when another cadet asked what really happened with the visiting commander, Ryan looked down at his tray for a moment, then said, I touched a story I did not earn. She corrected me. That was all. The answer disappointed those who wanted drama, but it satisfied the ones who understood discipline. Near sunset, Ryan returned to the classroom building. The hallway was empty now, the glass cases reflecting gold light from the courtyard. He found Grace standing near the display of academy graduates, studying names engraved beneath black and white photographs from decades past. Her leather folder rested against her side. The silver eagle and naval star badge on her sleeve looked almost muted in the evening light, less like decoration than a quiet signature. Ryan stopped several feet away and came to attention. Commander Whitaker. Grace turned. Cadet Miller. He held himself still, not stiff with pride this time, but steady with effort. I spoke with my mother. Grace's expression changed only slightly, but he saw it now because he had learned to notice small things. How is Evelyn? Calm, Ryan said. Then, after a pause, kinder than I deserved. Grace looked toward the courtyard, where the flag was lowering slowly against the orange sky. That sounds like her. Ryan took a breath. She said you stood beside her when standing was difficult. For the first time all day, Grace did not answer immediately. The words reached someplace beyond rank, beyond the classroom, beyond the carefully folded photograph. She did the same for me, Grace said. Ryan nodded, and the movement felt like setting something down. I wanted to ask for permission to write her about today, not as an assignment, just as her son. Grace studied him for a moment. Then write like her son, not like a cadet trying to sound impressive. Ryan almost smiled. Yes, ma'am. She stepped closer and opened the folder just enough to remove the photograph. She did not hand it to him. She held it between them so they could both see it under the last light coming through the windows. The red emergency glow in the image looked softer now. The shadow over Evelyn Miller's face did not hide her anymore. It protected something private. Grace stood beside her in the picture, younger but unmistakable, the same calm already present in her eyes. Ryan looked at the two women and finally understood that honor was not a statue. It was not a framed certificate or a story polished until it stopped sounding human. Honor was two people standing close in a hard moment, trusting each other enough to remain steady. "Thank you for keeping it," he said. Grace slid the photograph back into the folder with careful hands. "Thank your mother for giving it meaning." Outside, the bugle call carried across the academy grounds. Cadets stopped along the walkways. The flag came down with practiced care. Ryan stood beside Grace in silence, both facing the courtyard. For once, he did not feel the need to fill that silence with certainty. It was enough to stand in it respectfully. When the call ended, Grace turned to leave. Before she walked away, Ryan spoke one last time. "Ma'am, this morning I thought respect was something you defended after someone earned it." Grace looked back. "And now?" Ryan's eyes moved to the folder, then to the badge on her sleeve, then to the flag being folded outside. "Now I think respect is where you start when you do not know the whole story." Grace gave the smallest nod, the kind that felt more permanent than praise. "Good," she said. Then she walked down the hallway, quiet as she had entered, carrying the photograph, the memory, and the names that did not need to be shouted to matter. Ryan remained by the window until she disappeared around the corner. In the glass, he saw his own reflection in uniform, younger than he wanted to admit, but different from the cadet who had stood up that morning with stolen proof in his hand. He was still his mother's son. He was still stubborn. But now he understood that a legacy was not something to guard with arrogance. It was something to grow into with humility.